Today we continue looking through the Gospel of Luke as we look at highlights from Jesus' ministry over these weeks. We are going through the Gospel of Luke, reading some highlights of Jesus' ministry, and today we get to a big highlight. It's called the Transfiguration. So here is a reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 23 and 24, then 28 to 36. Hear now the word of the Lord. Then Jesus said to them all, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it." About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, John, and James with him and went up onto a mountain to pray. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared in glorious splendor, talking with Jesus. They spoke about his departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men standing with him. As the men were leaving Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what he was saying. While he was speaking, a cloud appeared and covered them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. A voice came from the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, they found that Jesus was alone. The disciples kept this to themselves and did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. May God bless the reading of this holy word today. In this story, we see an example of Jesus's inner circle of disciples. We know that he had called 12 different people specifically to be his leadership team, to share life intimately with him as he traveled. He had a lot of disciples in general who followed him around, listened to him. He had 12 that were the leadership team, but then he had these 3 today that was his closest, tightest group, his inner circle of confidants. Simon Peter, and then the brothers James and John. We don't know all the reasons why Jesus picked these 3 specific disciples to be in his closest circle. But we do know that they were the first disciples that Jesus called to follow him. So that would have made their relationship a little special, the ones who had been with him the longest from the very beginning. And Jesus called them to be his disciples. When he did so, before they followed him, they were all partners in a fishing business. So they knew each other, they worked together, they were already very close. And we know that these 3, Peter, James, and John, were the leaders in the Christian church after Jesus left, with Peter being the most senior leader. So maybe these 3 were invited up the mountain to witness this transfiguration because they were or would be leaders among Jesus's followers. And yet, as we can see, they still have a lot to learn. They're all 3 a little thick-headed, a little slow on the uptake, all throughout the Gospels. That's one of the gifts that the disciples give to us throughout the Gospels, is being thick-headed and slow and not understanding what Jesus is up to, just like us. So they always ask the questions that we wanted to ask. In fact, later on, a few chapters later, James and John pull Jesus aside and say, "Hey, Jesus, let one of us sit at your right and the other sit at your left when you come into glory. And that arrogant demand isn't the kind of Jesus-y humility that his disciples are supposed to have, right? Then later, Peter, when soldiers arrested Jesus, he pulls out his sword, cuts off one of the soldiers' ears. Not a very Jesus thing to do. He wasn't turning the other cheek in that instance. Then during the crucifixion, when people asked Peter if he was a disciple of Jesus, 3 times he denied ever knowing Jesus, ever. So, these are the guys that Jesus picks to see and hear what no one else does, to look behind the scenes today. These are the ones who will lead his followers after he is gone? Yikes. You sure can pick them, Jesus. I don't know. But I think Jesus got that from his Father. Throughout the Bible, as we read the Old Testament especially, God uses the most surprising people, what others might say are the most undeserving people, to do the most amazing things. It's like Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. And these 3 guys had some weaknesses. So maybe they were brought up the mountain to learn a few lessons, to have their minds blown, to shake them to the core, to show them that they really didn't have everything figured out like they thought. Maybe so. Okay, so what happens when they get up there? Well, first, it seems that these disciples fall asleep while Jesus is praying, which I think is really funny. One of the most amazing events in all human history, and what happens to them? Gosh, you couldn't have picked a more exciting time to fall asleep. And it's not the only time they did that. When Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, before he was arrested, he specifically took, again, these 3 aside to pray with him. And Matthew chapter 26 said that they all fell asleep. Not once, but twice in the Garden of Gethsemane. Oh my goodness. These guys need a shot of espresso stat. What is wrong with them? Although I do understand. They sound like me. When I was in school, I always fell asleep in class. It never failed. I fell asleep in math, science, social studies, English, band, PE. I had a real talent for falling asleep. Teachers always would get mad, so I learned how to hide it so as not to get in trouble. And I can go over the dark arts of falling asleep in class later. But teachers, they would get mad, but they don't understand. You never want to fall asleep in class. And I would try so hard to keep my eyes awake, and my eyelids were 1,000 pounds, and they would fall down, and I would lose one, and I'd still have one about halfway open, and I would try my hardest to stay awake, but I just couldn't do it. Maybe these disciples were like that. It's why, like I always say, sometimes you take a nap, but sometimes the nap takes you. I think that's what has happened here with these disciples. So up on the Mount of Transfiguration, verse 29 said that it's while Jesus was praying that he was transformed and started to receive a message from God. The disciples were sleeping. They were sleeping on the job. But Jesus was praying. That's a good thing for us to note. Jesus wasn't transformed and didn't become something incredible while he was minding his own business on the street, not paying attention. He didn't hear God's voice speak to him while he was busy talking and yammering on. He didn't receive encouragement from his heroes while he was watching TV or scrolling social media, right? He experienced the presence of God when he was deep in prayer. So let that be a lesson to us. He changes physically in his face and clothes, and then two people show up, Moses and Elijah, the two biggest heroes, you could say, of the Old Testament. Moses represented the law of the Old Testament because he received the law and the 10 Commandments. And Elijah represented the prophets of the Old Testament. He was the greatest of the Old Testament prophets who would deliver God's message. So it was literally like the law and the prophets were standing there in front of Jesus. Verse 30 says that Moses and Elijah talked with him about his departure, his death, which would come later. Maybe Moses and Elijah offer some encouragement to Jesus as he gets ready for that really terrible time. We know that Jesus was willing to make whatever sacrifice he needed to make, but we also know that he was really not looking forward to it because he knew how hard it would be. It was going to be very painful and very difficult, which is why in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before he died, Matthew 26 also says that Jesus was sorrowful and troubled and told Peter, James, and John, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Jesus wasn't just divine, he was also human, and any human would be anxious when faced with the prospect of a painful death. Torture and execution are not something to look forward to. So maybe Moses and Elijah were helping Jesus get ready for that difficult challenge, hearing his concerns and his worries and encouraging them. Meanwhile, the 3 disciples, asleep on the job, verse 32 says, they had been very sleepy, but then they became fully awake, and they see this amazing scene that is now in front of them. Peter was always one to fill a silence with words, so he opens his big mouth again. But verse 33 points out that he didn't even know what he was saying, which is understandable. Have you ever been really, really surprised? Maybe a surprise birthday party when everyone jumps out and goes, "Surprise!" and you had no idea. Or you were caught off guard by something crazy that you didn't expect and you can't even form words and go, oh my goodness. You just don't know what you are saying. And I think that's Peter here in this situation. However, he still tries to take charge, as if to say, I know what we should do. Listen to me. He has one of those personalities that is seldom right, but is always confident. Maybe you know some folks like that yourself. Peter isn't admitting that he is blown away by what's happening, this mountaintop experience. It's awesome. Jesus has been physically transfigured before them. The great Moses and Elijah are back from the dead. They're now all surrounded by a dark cloud. So Peter thinks, let's set up camp for a while. We'll stay a bit. You get a shelter, you get a shelter, you get a shelter. We'll all stay here a while. But of course, they don't stay up on the mountaintop. As awesome as the experience is, you can't stay on top of the mountain forever. Eventually, you have to go back to normal life. And that's tough to do as well when you're having an amazing experience. I remember I used to feel that way every time I would take a group to youth camp. I loved that week. The worship services were so moving. The activities, the Bible studies, the games, the time spent with each other. It was wonderful and it was great. And I felt different. It's kind of like when you go on vacation, you're not your normal, everyday, boring self. You are your vacation self, and it's a lot more fun. And I would be my youth camp self, and I was more fun, and it was great. And as we would drive back a few hours in the church van, I could feel the change, and I could feel going back to normal while I was driving, and it was always a little sad going back to normal life. But you can't stay up on the mountaintop forever. There are people out in normal life that need help and encouragement and love, and you've got work to do. Hopefully, though, you can take some of the transformation with you that you got from the mountain as you go back down. I bet Peter, James, and John were different after that. They were so blown away. Verse 36 said that when they got back, they didn't even tell anybody what they had seen. But I wonder, they probably didn't tell anybody because it was the craziest thing they had ever seen up to that point. Who would have believed them anyway if they got back down and told the other 9 disciples, guys, it was amazing. Moses was back from the dead. Elijah was back from the dead. Jesus was transformed. The voice of God spoke. And you can just kind of see the other 9 disciples going, really? Really? Especially Thomas. He's like, I don't think so. No way. Did you guys fall asleep again? Was this another dream when you were falling asleep again? Come on. No. I don't think so. The other disciples would have been naturally skeptical. They just wouldn't understand. Not yet. Maybe later, the other disciples will be ready to hear about it, but for now, only these 3 have been changed. And I get that too. When you have been somewhere amazing, whether it's a vacation or a mission trip, or you've been to a seminar or a great conference, and you come back and you try and tell people how great it was, and you're still on this kind of high of the experience. Maybe you went to another country or another culture, and you just try and tell them how awesome it was, and they go, oh, good. I'm glad it was nice. Glad it was a good time. And you go, no, you don't understand. It was just so, and you can't even put it into words how moving it was. So one question this text makes us ask is, do you really want to go up the mountain with Jesus? Because most everybody else is staying down on the ground in the real world where everything's normal. But the people who went up and came back were all different. They'd seen some stuff. They were changed. So, do you really want to go up the mountain? Because when you go up the mountain, it changes you. You even start to see Jesus differently than you did. He looks different to you than he used to after you've had your mind blown. And many folks wouldn't be okay with that. Most folks have an idea in their heads of what Jesus is like, or only God is like, how they think only this and nothing else. And if that were to be changed or transformed or challenged to have their minds opened, it might make some people very uncomfortable. After Jesus came back from the dead, it said that he opened the disciples' minds. Some people don't like that because once you've had your mind open, it's hard to close it again. So do you really want to go up the mountain? It can be funny how people, even in churches, will say that they want to be transformed, but what they're really saying is, well, I just want things to be the way they are, but better. Or I just want to do the things that I do already, but just be a better me. Or I want things to be the way I like them, the way they used to be, just a little better. But when faced with real change, most people resist it because real change is, by its nature, disruptive. Real change changes things, so it can be unnerving. But we should not try to resist transformation and growth, or try to resist anything at all because it's just different. Yes, it's true that change shakes up the routines we've built into our lives, and I don't like that. I have a plan and a routine for every day. I don't like it when things get thrown off, but change throws us off, messes up our plans, makes us question what we think we're doing in the first place. But change can be helpful if we let it. It can push us out of our tightly controlled lives and out into the world. It can open our mind to God's continual movement and revelations. Change helps us say goodbye to some things and hello to other new things. It helps us learn new ways of being in the world. And besides, none of us are perfect. None of our lives is perfect. We all know it. We all know that we could be better, life could be better, and yet still we resist anything changing at all because that would put it outside of our comfort zone, and we're a little unsure about it, and we would prefer to stay with the devil we know, even if we don't enjoy it all that much. Regardless, some change in life is unavoidable. We all age and grow older. We all look differently as the years go by. Every year, more gray hairs pop up in the mirror. As much as I try and stop them, I have to stop looking at my picture in the hallway because all I can think of is all the gray hairs that have popped out since I started here and took my picture. I might not like that change, but it's going to happen, whether I like it or not. Some change is unavoidable, but transformation is optional. We can live in denial, pretending like we can keep doing everything the way it is, or we can recognize change as a vehicle of transformation, an opportunity for growth and hope for the future. It doesn't mean that change will not be uncomfortable. It's those learning curves that are hard. But at least we'll save ourselves the wasted energy of resisting it. And hopefully we'll find ourselves brighter and wiser with bigger hearts because of it. Then we can model the Apostle Paul's instructions in Romans 12:2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will truly is. God is in the business of growth and transformation, of newness and possibility. Following God gives us the opportunity to become better than we ever thought we could, and to never, ever stop growing, because we will never figure everything out and we will never achieve perfection in this life. There will be some growing pains along the way, yes, but we will be stronger and wiser for it. There might even be times of cloudiness and darkness, because that's what happened on the mountaintop. That most amazing of experience, it still involved a dark cloud of uncertainty, and that might come for us too. But remember what we said earlier. Maybe these 3 disciples were brought up the mountain because they needed to learn a few things. They needed to have their minds blown, to be shaken to the core, and be shown that they really hadn't figured everything out yet. Maybe we need that too. So, what'll it be? Will you stay the same on the ground, or accept the change of transformation that you will experience when you go up the mountain with Jesus? Let us pray. Oh God, we confess that we so often make choices to keep us in our comfort zone, that we so often work hard to keep things the way they are because anything new or different throws us off and is uncomfortable. So we will need you to remind us, oh God, that you are always calling us to grow, that we can always learn more, that we can always improve and mature inside and out. Help us to hear your voice as you invite us up the mountain sometimes to have amazing experiences that we didn't expect, we might not have chosen, we might have wanted to avoid because it might be scary. Remind us, oh God, that your Son is walking up mountains and inviting us to follow along so that we can be changed a little more into his likeness each time. We might need you to hold our hands as we walk up, but remind us that we will have the honor of being transformed more and more into the glory and mind of Christ each time. In your name we pray. Amen.